In this video, I'm going to show you how I pour concrete for the foundation for my shed. Alright, my site is prepared, the forms are all finished, the rebar is in, I've marked the placement for all of my wall anchors, the concrete truck is on the way. Hey, it's time to pour the foundation already. But before we get started, have you subscribed yet? You don't want to miss any of my build videos. The basic idea of pouring concrete is not a complex one. All you really need to do is get concrete into the forms. But this process can be both time-consuming and physically demanding, depending on how you do it. To start, you need to calculate exactly how much concrete you need. And concrete calculations are generally done by the cubic yard, so getting the math right can be just a little bit tricky. The easiest way to do this is to use a concrete calculator. I'll link to this one that I used down below. My slab is about 4 3/4 inches thick, about 8 feet wide, and 16 feet long. So using this calculator, I determined I would need 1.88 cubic yards. Now there are basically two options for buying concrete. You can mix it yourself, or you can buy it from a local mix plant that will deliver it ready to pour from a truck. Now cost is a big factor in both approaches, and most people prefer to get bags of ready mix at their local home center and mix it up themselves in a wheelbarrow or in a rented concrete mixer. This is a great approach for small slabs, but for this size, here's how the math worked out. I rounded up to about 2 yards. I want to make sure I don't run out. Now I'm only going to get 0.0167 yards per bag, so I need 120 of them at a cost of $2.89 a bag. Comes out to about $345 for the concrete. Add in the cost of a mixer and I'm at $400 if I do it myself. Now I called around to several mix plants, and the best pricing I could get for 2 yards breaks down like this. The first yard is the most expensive because that's what gets the truck there in the first place. The second yard is less, so the total cost for that was going to be $320 just for the concrete. Adding in the short load fee and the delivery on Saturday, because that's when I wanted to do the pour, and the total comes out to $420. Now that's only $20 more than if I do it myself, but I don't have to actually mix it. It comes ready to pour. It was obvious to me that I'd save a lot of time and a sore back by having the concrete delivered from a local mix plant. So I asked a few friends to come on over and bring their wheelbarrows, promising them some cold drinks and a chance to make lots of fun of me. And who could say no to that? As soon as the truck arrived and started getting ready to fill wheelbarrows, I wet down the gravel and the sides of the forms. Concrete needs water in order for the chemical reaction to take place properly for the curing, and wetting down the gravel helps make sure that the moisture in the mix is not sucked out by the gravel. Getting the forms wet will help make sure that they are a little bit easier to remove after the concrete has started to cure. Right as I finished getting everything wet down, the first wheelbarrow arrived. I'd like to pause here to point out a mistake that I made and hopefully to help you avoid the same error in your project. The first 2 wheelbarrows came off the truck relatively dry. They didn't have a lot of water in the mix. I should have shoveled these into the center area of the form rather than pouring it all into one corner. By pouring it all in like this, we did 2 things. First, it knocked the rebar right off of its supports and we had to scramble to reposition it. And secondly, that very dry mix did not flow well into the corner of the forms, and I wound up with lots of holes that needed to be patched later after I removed the forms. If your first few loads are dry, distribute them a few shovelfuls at a time throughout the center area of your form. That will help keep your rebar in place and will not ruin the finish along your form edges. Before everyone arrived, I laid down a path of old scrap wood sheeting to protect my front yard and to make it a little easier to drive the wheelbarrows over the rocks in my side yard. Full wheelbarrows are quite heavy, so anything you can do to make them easier to push will make the job that much easier. Start filling your forms from the edge farthest from the truck, working your way back towards the truck. As soon as the concrete gets close to the top of the forms, use a long, wet 2x4 or other straight edge to check to see if it is deep enough. Wetting this down is helpful because dry lumber will suck the water right out of your concrete mix, which may make it weaker right at the top surface. When it looks like the concrete is about to the top of the forms, use the 2x4 in a back and forth sawing motion to spread the concrete out so it is even with the top of the forms. This process is called screeding, and it ensures that you get enough concrete into the forms at exactly the right height. Use shovels to move the concrete from high areas to low areas as needed until the screed board makes contact with the top surface all the way across the slab. Don't screed too much, as you'll separate too much of the cream from the aggregate, the small rocks and the sand that's in the concrete mix. Just do it enough to make sure you have filled the forms all the way to the top. Now, one important safety note here, concrete is a caustic material when it's wet. Wear rubber gloves to protect your hands and rubber boots if you're going to be standing in the mud. Wash off any concrete that comes into contact with your skin promptly to avoid skin irritation. Once the forms are completely full and the surface has been screeded so that it is level with the top of the forms, it's time to use a bowl float to begin the process of smoothing the surface. Ideally, use the bowl float in both directions. My side yard was not wide enough for me to do it that way, so I just did it from both ends. Next, we installed my anchor brackets for the wall anchors that I built in my last video. If you didn't get a chance to see that one, you can click up in the little link that just showed up to go check it out. Once those brackets were installed, I snapped a line across the center of the slab to use as a guide for putting in a relief groove. This is important because when, not if, the slab cracks, it will contain the crack inside this groove and keep cracks from appearing in the rest of the slab. Next, I tried cutting in the rounded over edges that will be in my doorways, but the concrete was still really way too wet. Just then, I remembered that I needed to lightly tap the outer edges of the forms with a hammer to help release any bubbles that were along the inner edges of the forms, so I did that before the concrete set up any further. Speaking of setup time, concrete takes anywhere from 4 to 6 hours to set up, depending on how wet the mix was, the temperature outside, whether it's in direct sunlight, how windy the day is, how humid it is, etc. So, this is all I'm going to cover in this video, as the next step is to wait for all of the water that accumulates on the surface to be reabsorbed as the concrete starts to cure. In my case, that took a little more than 2 hours, so in my next video I'll cover the steps that I took after the concrete had set up enough to finish the surface. Hopefully you can see that pouring your own concrete is not a very difficult job. If you noticed anything that I did incorrectly, or if you've got suggestions for how I could improve, or even if you just have any questions or comments, please leave them down below. And also, if you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and do that now so you make sure you don't miss any of my build videos. And thanks for watching!